Thank you for joining us at WBB today to kick off our 5 days, 5 topics in 5 ways. These are 5 webinars that our experts put together to share approaches and tools you can use to impact your organization in this weird pandemic environment. We'll feature a webinar each day at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. These are open to the public and you're welcome to join us for all of them. I'm your host, Don Steyer. Couple items as we get started, just to reassure you about how to go to webinar platform works. Your mic is automatically muted and your video is not shared with the screen, so no one else will be able to see or hear you. I'm really excited about today's topic. It's on 5 shifts for the successful virtual organization. And we'll be talking about the 5 most important things to do right now to help your organization thrive in this very uncertain time. For any questions or thoughts you want to share, please use the Q&A feature on your screens. You can submit questions throughout the presentation. If we don't get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar, and we'll also send you notes from today's presentation, including any resources we reference. We'll also be using chat box throughout the presentation to display highlights of the discussion. We understand that people learn different ways. And for some of you, you learn best by listening to the presentation. For others, you learn best by reading. We also know some of you are note takers and would like to reference what you're learning. So if you learn best by listening, feel free to ignore the chat box. There won't be anything in there you need for the presentation. If you learn best by reading, you'll find helpful notes and references in the chat box. And for those of you who just like to take notes, we'll follow up next week with key takeaways. Today, I'm honored to interview Trevor Braun. Trevor is a culture expert and is presenting from Denver, Colorado. He has 28 years experience in leader and culture development, including teaching, advising, and consulting at all different levels of the organization. So welcome, Trevor. So Trevor, culture can feel elusive, and I guess I just interrupted you there, but culture can feel elusive or unclear sometimes. When we talk about culture, what do you mean?
You're right, it can be, because it has certainly lots of ways of defining it. But a good way to think of culture is the thermostat that sets the temperature of an organization, or sets the temperature of a team or a division or a directorate. And that temperature is generally set by the people who lead the organization or who lead that team. And they say, here's what we want people to feel and experience. We want them to feel as though the organization is 70 degrees. But that's not the way that culture is measured within an organization. The way it's measured in an organization is the thermometer. And this is what do people experience in the organization. So we have leaders in the organization or in the team or in the directorate say, here's what we want it to be. But you need to see if it's actually working, if it's actually successful within the organization, by asking people in the organization, what do you experience? What does working in this place feel like to you? And most of the time we don't like to talk about it in terms of feeling, but when we go home at night or when we're talking to people that we know about our jobs, we do talk about how does it make us feel? Do we feel valued? Do we feel like our contribution matters? Do I feel like I'm contributing, like my skills and my strengths are being used? So thermometer and thermostat are kind of a good way to understand culture. And every organization has culture. Either you have a culture by default, which is you don't pay any attention to it and you just kind of hope for the best. The problem with that is that default culture usually appeals to the lowest common denominator, or you have culture by design. And that means that you very intentionally set out to say, here's what we want people to experience at all levels of the organization. Here's what we want them to experience in work. Here's what we want them to experience in their professional relationships. Here's what we want our customer to experience. So I think that's a good way to kind of understand culture.
So we have a quote here that says, culture is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. So given that, and given the weird environment we're in today, what's our biggest threat to organizational culture?
In our current environment, I would say the biggest threat that organizations are facing is burnout. Early on in this global health crisis, organization called Eagle Hill started doing surveys to ask people where they were with the issue of burnout. And early on, the burnout rate among those that they surveyed was roughly about 35 to 40%. They continue to do that same survey over the course of months as this thing has gone on. And the uptick in the percentage of people who are experiencing burnout has gone up dramatically. We're well over half now. Half of the people are experiencing burnout. And what that translates into in a real sense is burnout costs about $500 billion a year to American corporations. This means that people are 2.6 times more likely to look for another job. People who are experiencing burnout are 63% more likely to take sick days. They're 23% more likely to end up in the ER. So burnout is a real thing. And in this environment, the challenge that we're having is that work is no longer someplace we go. We don't get up in the morning and tell people I'm going to work. We get up in the morning and we're at work already for many people. And so there's a lack of boundary. There's a lack of clear separation between what I do and who I am and my home life, my family life, my relationships. And you would think, and I think most of us thought this when we started working at home more, we thought we would have more time. Maybe we would not have a long commute, and that we would maybe gain some sort of work-life balance. But according to Bloomberg, they published a study a couple of months ago that said that people were working on average 3 hours a day longer. So to put that in perspective, Americans already work more days in a week, more hours in a day, and more weeks in a year than any industrialized nation in the world. And then you top on that 3 extra hours every day. So burnout is a big deal. And watching for it and knowing what to look for is important.
So if to pull on that thread, so now that we have technology and it's catching up very quickly on how we stay connected, and so is that technology helping us or is it hurting us?
Well, obviously it's both. We've added a new phrase to our vernacular that didn't exist 9 months ago. Now people are talking about Zoom fatigue, and this is a real thing. This is a thing that people are going. I had 7 or 8 Zoom calls today, and I get to the end of the day, and I feel like I've run a marathon. I'm just exhausted. And so it was an attempt originally, to do the right thing, and that was how do we connect with each other in a more significant way than just getting on a old school conference call line. So I think it has helped, but as with most things, we probably took it to its illogical extreme, and we need the pendulum to swing back more to the middle and say, how can we best be utilizing lots of types of technology to further what we're doing? And so sometimes that means doing an old school conference call, or utilizing video when we need to, and it's going to really help us. But there are lots of different ways that we can connect. It doesn't always have to be video. Sometimes it can be through a texting series, or I've encouraged clients of mine, when you're using Zoom, try this. Get everybody on Zoom and have nobody unmute their mic, have nobody on camera, and conduct an entire meeting using the chat section. You'll experience something entirely different when you get people to write their answers. Generally speaking, we're more thoughtful when we write our answers, and we can get people to a new and different level. But the technology, to go back to the burnout issue, the technology should be serving us to be able to take that temperature of the people in our organization. We need to be looking for social isolation. We need to be looking for swings in moods or disengagement. Do people have the right workspace to work in, or literally are they sitting at the end of their bed every day with their laptop in their lap because they're in 500 square feet that's now being shared by 5 people? Do they have the right connection to be able to conduct work? All of those things are going to contribute to people's engagement level.
We have a quote up here from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And a lot of the research around culture and building a thriving culture has been done in a world that's much different than the world we live in today. And some people predict that world may never come back, at least the way it used to be. So is there one aspect of culture that does set apart a great organization from a mediocre one? Or even
there is. Yeah, there certainly is. When we talk about this particular environment, while yes, lots of things have changed, when it comes to culture, I would say that what I'm about to say probably hasn't changed. It's become even more important, and that is what sets a great organization apart from a good organization, and certainly a bad organization, is they know why they exist. As an organization, they know why they do what they do. Simon Sinek, who has grown quite famous organizational consultant like myself, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The great organizations know why they exist, and the people who work in those organizations know why the organization exists, and more importantly, they know how they can contribute to that why. This has become heightened tenfold in this environment where we all got scattered, we all got dispersed. And if you don't know how you contribute, if you don't know the part you play in your organization, and if you don't know why your organization even exists, then you're going to feel even more removed, more disconnected. So that would be the first thing I would say is the great organizations know why they exist. Second, I would say that the great organizations are paying attention. They're paying attention to their people. They're going out of their way to figure out how to connect with people in this environment. If you are still leading people in this environment today the way you were 8 months ago, you're failing, because it is not the same. What it takes to engage with people in a dispersed environment is radically different, because you're not having the random hallway conversations, you're not in the break room together, you're not going out to grab coffee together. And so what that means is we need to be doing different things. Our roles as managers, as leaders, as supervisors, and even just people in the organization is radically different. We need to be demonstrating that we are getting it, that we're paying attention to our workforce, and that we do have a good sense of what the temperature of the organization is. And that's not an easy thing to do, and that's not something that most of us were trained to do. A good example of this is that the fact that when we all go to a physical work environment together, I, as a manager, as a leader, as a supervisor, I don't have to facilitate social interaction. That's not a role that I've had to play, because it just happens. People just interact socially together. They have coffee together. They stop by each other's office or cubicle. They go to lunch together. Maybe they go out to work after work together. So I don't have to facilitate that as a manager or a leader. In this environment, you do have to facilitate it, because if you don't, it's not happening. I mean, we have some people right now who are in extreme isolated situations. They live alone. They're working from home. And they have maybe little or no interaction with other people on a social level. And so I, as a leader, we all as leaders of organizations, whether we're in a formalized leadership role or not, really doesn't matter. We need to be making sure that people are feeling connected to each other, that they have a sense of what's going on in each other's lives. And this can be done, relatively easily. My advice always is, when you're doing a Zoom call, don't just jump into the agenda. Take a minute, take a few minutes to just go around and have everybody answer a simple question like, what are you binge watching right now? Or what do you love about working from home? What do you hate about working from home? To just get them to feel like they're being seen and they're being heard, and allow people to do something that they're just not allowed to do oftentimes in a virtual environment.
Sure. Or my favorite question is, if you could pick a superhero, which one would you be, right?
Exactly. There are so many good ways. I have a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I'm not very good at that." The good news is, as long as you know how Google works, right, all you have to do is Google good questions to ask at the opening of a meeting, and you will have a lifetime supply of good questions to ask. And people are busy, certainly. But you don't have, most of the time you're spending 5 minutes and you just go around and you just get everybody to answer, and you're going to hear some things that you're not going to hear any other way, from questions that seem really fairly benign or fairly straightforward. You're going to learn some things. I had a group that the question that I posed to them was, if the pandemic ended tomorrow, what would be the first thing you would do? And I expected and got a lot of answers like, I would, I want to go eat at a restaurant, or I want to have a bunch of people over, and for the most part, that was how people answer the question, and it was fine, it was great. And then one of the guys on the call said, I would go to the hospital and visit my dad. He's been in the hospital for a month and I can't get in to see him.
Right.
And in that moment, you know, you get people who are going to reveal where they are and what they're struggling with on a daily basis. And that's, like I said, that's part of the role that we now play.
So it sounds like focusing on culture can take a lot of time. And you know, sometimes people say time is money. And right now, I know as a manager, I need my resources in areas that make them more productive. You know, it's a tough time. So, um, can we wait and work on our culture later?
I mean, you can. You don't want to. You know, the quote that we had up just a second ago from Jim Senegal, who was the founding CEO of Costco, where he said, "It's, you know, culture's not the most important thing; it's the only thing." And you know, you know, companies like Costco and Southwest Airlines and Salesforce and Google. I mean, these are companies that they spend a great deal of time on their culture. And yeah, they're probably spending a great deal of money too. But I would say that the investment in culture is the investment of time, because that's what it takes. It takes time. And so yes, that is an investment, but it's not a budget investment. Are we being thoughtful about how we conduct ourselves? You know, not only does every organization have culture, every organization has a shadow culture. And shadow culture is that thing that sometimes we have a hard time articulating it, but we know it when we run into it. It's all of those things that frustrate us. It's that brick wall of resistance that we get when we try to do something that's creative or unusual. And when we choose not to focus on culture, then yes, we're going to end up with default culture, but we're also going to end up with a pretty prevalent shadow culture. And the shadow culture oftentimes is the thing that causes people to disengage, and disengagement leads to lack of productivity. Disengagement leads to lack of retention, and you know, losing a quality employee because they disengage because of the shadow culture, or because they're not being paid attention to, or they're not being heard, is costing a lot of money. Retaining, you know, good employees is an investment, because losing an average employee to replace that, you know, it's going to cost anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 to replace that employee by the time you calculate all of the effort that's going to go in to find their replacement. So I would say, yeah, you can, but it comes at a high cost to ignore it.
Sure.
And you know, in our world right now, I think that this is the perfect time to pay attention to culture. It's the perfect time to say we want to show something that maybe we haven't been very good at. You know, in particular, empathy is the lost art in leadership. Showing that as leaders, as managers, as supervisors, that we are empathetic, that we are compassionate, that we are taking into account the fact that people are doing something that we've never been asked to do before. I'll give you an example. At no point in time have most of us been expected to be a full-time spouse or partner, a full-time parent, a full-time employee. But that's literally what we're all doing right now. Because when we stopped going to a physical place to work, we were in environments where we were expected to wear all of those hats at the same time. Now, it's not like when you go to work that you're any less of a parent. Obviously, you're still a parent, but the role you're playing in your children's life while they're at school and you're at work is very different. You know, now the boundaries are all blurred. And on the other side of the screen that you're watching them on, they've got 4 kids on a Zoom call, and chaos is ensuing. And you know, I've been on webinars that I've been doing, and I'm watching the people on the screen, and I've watched plenty of parents manage conflict with their children in the same room while we're on a webinar. And they're trying to hold it all together, but I can see the chaos is just swirling all around them. And so having compassion and knowing what the people around you are struggling with and what they're going through and what are the challenges and the demands that they have, and realizing, wow, you know, we are all experiencing something that is unprecedented. And I don't really like that term in this environment because it's way overused, but it is true.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you. And I you know, in the spirit of the webinar series, when we talk about 5 ways, I heard you say 5 things. Take the temperature of your organization, embrace new leadership roles, use technology wisely, be very clear on why your organization exists, and then culture is a time investment, not necessarily a budget line item. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions from the crowd, from the audience. And I have one here. So do we need to get a chief culture officer? Let HR try to be cultural engineers or employ organizational behavior experts?
Yes, and yes. I have been encouraged by the fact that there have been some pretty predominant organizations that do have chief culture officers. Southwest Airlines is one of them. They have a director of culture that works for them. I had the honor of meeting with them, and they do culture in a phenomenal way, and they certainly have formalized it. But I've also worked with lots of organizations that don't have the resources to formalize it, and that doesn't mean that they can't do it. You can do it, and a lot of it can be employee-led. It takes the initiative to do it, to say, what are people experiencing? That's where it always starts, where you find out what's our reality, and then what do we want it to be, and painting that picture for what you want it to be. And people on this call may be thinking, I'm not the CEO, so I can't do culture. But like I said earlier, culture can be determined even on a team level or on a group level. What do we want people on our team to be experiencing? And we work with lots of organizations where we're not doing big culture work. We're doing microcosm culture work of how do I get my team's culture to be the right culture? How do we get them to experience that? Because that's really where people experience it on a daily basis. Certainly there are resources out there of people that you could hire. That's one of the things that we do at WBV. But there are lots of ways to go about doing it. It's just a matter of doing it.
So another question from the crowd, how do you define burnout? We often talk about burnout in terms of profession burnout, but today's environment seems to cross personal professional burnout boundaries.
Yeah, it does, because and that's really good insight, because there are so few boundaries that exist right now. And in the people that I coach, I do talk to them about making sure that there are clear boundaries. There are ways that you can do this. I've always worked remotely. My entire adult life, I've worked at home when I wasn't traveling to do client engagements. And but when I do work at home, I have some very clear things that I do to make sure that there are boundaries. I have a start time, and I don't start work until that start time starts, and I have an end time. And I make sure that I adhere to those as though I were going to a physical work location. And so, yeah, people are experiencing a lack of boundaries in totality in their life. Obviously, the only influence that we have is helping them find those boundaries within in their professional lives. One of the things that we can be doing is to realize that the 8 to 5 workday is dead. In this environment, it's dead. We may want to do our daily stand-up calls at 8 a.m. and half of our team is trying to get their kids on a Zoom call at 8 a.m. And we may need to adjust. We may need to show flexibility with that. But we also need to encourage people to set those boundaries of start times and end times. Right now, one of our clients is really struggling with the fact that since the beginning of the pandemic in March, their people aren't taking any PTO. They're not taking any time off. And when asked why, they're like, well, where would we go? There's nowhere to go. Or I don't feel comfortable going someplace, or I don't feel safe going someplace. So they're just working all the time. And so they're accruing this a massive amount of PTO. And a lot of them are use it or lose it. And so they're struggling with having to encourage people to take time off. That's never been our reality before. I've never been in a position where you had to say, you really should take some time off. Now we have to do that. Now we have to be saying, you have to take time off.
Right. One more question from the audience. Culture change takes time. Can you spend a little time discussing leaders' ability to address climate, which hopefully helps shape the course for eventual culture? These things scroll, so sometimes I lose my place. Did you catch the question?
I don't know if I did, but I'm going to answer one. Culture does take time. Painting that picture of what you want the culture to be. One, it takes time to do that. You have to be really thoughtful about it. Two, you have to have a tenacity around culture that, quite frankly, most organizations don't have. We don't have the attention span often that we need to. If you say, here's the kind of culture that we want, about the time that you're sick of talking about that culture is about the time the average person in your organization is hearing it for the first time. It's the same notion as to, when you're watching TV and you see a commercial for the same product 5 times. That's not a mistake. They do that on purpose, because by the 5th time, you have to have whatever that thing is, or the 6th time or the 7th time. So it does take time, and it takes tenacity. Beyond that, I think what the question was also asking was about climate. There are things that right now, in particular, you can change about your climate, even though you maybe are still doing work or still picturing what the culture is. And I think that that's where it really, the climate aspect is taking the temperature, asking people, how are you doing? And then when they give you the pat answer, then you say, how are you really doing? Getting beyond the surface answer, asking questions like, are you taking time for yourself? Do you have scheduled time off? Watching for people who normally are really engaged, who are disengaged, and taking the time to get on the phone with them one-on-one. I am coaching a leader right now who early on in this health crisis, he made it a point that he called every person in his organization one-on-one. And he did that every week for the first 6 weeks. And it was simply just a quick check-in. These weren't long conversations. They were short conversations. How are you doing? How are things going? How's your family? Is everyone okay? And what do you need from me as you're the leader of your organization? Now it takes time, but there's a thoughtfulness and an intentionality to that that's going to change the temperature. It's going to change the climate of the organization.
So we have about a minute left. One last question. What can managers do to encourage employees to be open about what their concerns or needs are, flexibility, prioritizing, etc., to help them not burn out?
Well, to use another term that I don't particularly like, because I think it's overused, we do have to create a safe space for people to do that. And oftentimes that safe space is not on a group call. Sometimes people aren't going to share with you that they're not doing well, with 12 of their peers staring back at them on a screen. So I do think sometimes it is taking the time to engage with people one-on-one. I do think that, in large organizations, I think that there are ways that you can be encouraging them to tell that, that story for them, that it needs to be done in like I said, in a safe, more private environment. It might be possible that you are encouraging people to provide feedback to HR, if that's a construct within your organization that you can do that. I certainly would encourage that. But again, I think it's the initiative of the manager, of the leader, to really demonstrate and to show people, hey, you know what, I care about you. I care about where you are in this current environment, and I'm going to reach out to you and I'm going to ask. And the first time you do that, you may not get full answers. You may not get the deeper answers. You may not get the more insightful answers. And maybe you do it 2 or 3 times, and by the 3rd time, you're getting something totally different.
Sure. Well, Trevor, thank you very much for your insights, and everybody on the line, thank you for joining us today. If we didn't have a chance to get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar, and we'll also send the notes from today's presentation, including any resources that we referenced. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We'll continue on our webinar series. It's 2020, so what next? Change is inevitable. Our presenter, Deb Durham, will share with us ways we can succeed at change versus merely surviving at the same time. So we'll start again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Hope you all have a great day.